Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The headlines. Senate begins final push on voting rights bills with eye to filibuster reform. And you go, need the voting rights stuff done. Need that done immediately. If Democrats are going to be competitive in the next election, because as we speak, Republicans are not shy about the fact that they are going to rig the next election. They are doing everything in their power to ensure that the game is already over before it even begins. And I look to Tennessee. Tennessee doing what I'm not going to just say Republicans, what people in power do. You know, that old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is that. The story being reported today is that the Republicans in Tennessee are looking at Nashville, which is a Democratic stronghold, and looking at how they're going to carve that up in such a way that they're going to basically dilute the Democrats' stronghold of Nashville. And they'll put a little bit over in this district, a little bit over in this district, a little bit over there, a little bit here, a little spice of it over there, basically watering it down to where you get no Democrats. And this is how they've played the game and won as many seats as they've have. Because understand, their policies are not popular. They don't have a policy agenda that the American people want other than hate and division. And this is not new. This is not new. In fact, I had someone remind me the other day that, Reagan era forward, it's been really all about destroying government. And the people that they've put into these positions of power have all been about restraining the power of we the people, of silencing us. Because if you want to destroy government, if you want to shrink government to the size that you can drag it in the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub, what you're really saying is, I'm fearful of the people. I want to restrain the people's ability to do things that need to get done, which is why, again, I look to the historic infrastructure plan. $1.2 trillion sounds like, wow, it's a lot of money. And it is. But when you look at the fact that our need is 4 times that, you go, is it enough? And the answer is no. This is something that should have happened a couple of times by now to fix our infrastructure, but no. We've got to give tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. We've got to create Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Warren Buffett. We've got to create our billionaire oligarchs. And we've created them through a tax code that encourages hoarding and extreme wealth. It's what we've done. Congratulations. We have the most billionaires in the world. Yet we still have children who go to bed hungry every night. It's been our policy, and they've done this. Give Republicans credit. They've done this by using the rules of the road that they've rigged to ensure that they maintain power. Because they are the minority party in this country. There are more registered Democrats than there are Republicans. There are more people who support democratic principles and ideals and policies and all that, yet none of that seems to happen. Why? Because of gerrymandering, because of vote rigging, because of, the filibuster, which has always been used in the Senate to be the place where, good ideas and progress for working class folks go to die. Which is why you're seeing people who are so hell-bent on got to maintain the filibuster. When the reality is, as I said, the filibuster has been that thing that the wealth class has used to ensure that, they're insulated from us. And this is the frustrating part of this, because we need what's in that Build Back Better plan. We need massive investment in education and healthcare and infrastructure. We need it. As a country, we need it. And the wealth class needs it. But understand, their thinking is short term. Hooray for me now. The one who dies with the most toys wins. Greed is good. Me. And then you look 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, and you are where we are now. We haven't invested in the country, and we're looking abroad going, can we compete? The Chinese don't have this problem. They've made these massive investments for a decade now. They don't have a Joe Manchin. They don't have a Republican Party that they have to negotiate with. They just do. They do what we want to do. Now, I'm not advocating in any way, shape, or form a Chinese style of government, but I am advocating for a more democratized form of government. And for me, the filibuster is that one thing that said, no, not going to do it. Not going to have democracy. I have said from the beginning, and I will not shy away from this, I want to see a talking filibuster. When I learned about government as a young man, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was the movie that everyone had to go back and look at. And it was a talking filibuster. You had to get up and hold the floor. You had to make your impassioned plea for your side. I mean, it's turned into, when they've actually done it, reading the phone book or the Bible or whatever, Dr. Seuss, whatever reading material they have, instead of talking about the issue. But I'm of the mindset, if you want to hold the floor, you got to be on point. Explain to me, Republicans, why you're against increasing the minimum wage. Why can't we have an indexed minimum wage to inflation? Why can't we ensure that the minimum wage is a living wage? Why can't workers join and form unions as the National Labor Relations Act guarantees them? Explain to me through your words, and I want to hear it out of your mouth, why it's bad. Make the argument. See, they don't have to today. All they have to do is, I'm just not going to know. And their supporters never hear or see what these people actually believe. And all they get is a bunch of dark money going into these attack ads from who knows where. Americans for dogs and puppies. Mom loves apple pie in America too. How can you be against that? And they put out these attack ads that makes you think what you really want, you don't. Like healthcare, education for your children, good quality, family-sustaining wage jobs, trade policies that actually encourage domestic production and domestic consumption. Can't have those things because that's bad for the billionaire class, the wealth class of the country. Don't want it because it's bad for them. And look, everybody I talk to, even my most conservative opponents, want voting, want and believe, say they believe at least, say, and I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt, that they believe that people should be allowed to vote, that every American should have the right to cast a ballot in what is the greatest experiment in the history of the planet of self-governance. This idea that with our ballot, we cast the future of our nation, and that everyone should have access to that. I've yet to find someone saying, no, we need to be blocking people. Well, that's not true. I do know a couple of original intentists, but they're out on the fringe and probably sitting on the Supreme Court. But that's a whole other story. No, there are some. The folks who tell you that we want to go back to the original intent of the Constitution. They're the ones who want women in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant, want blacks back in the field as slaves picking cotton, and gays in the closet, and all the other things that era we thought possible. This was a white landowning male country, nobody else. The original intentists, that's what they throw out. But I think most people who are sane and rational, they believe everyone should have the right to vote, and it shouldn't be overly cumbersome. And I believe in this day and age, with the technology we have, it should be much easier. Now, I was an early supporter of the For the People Act. I said, there's a lot of stuff in there that, we can throw off the table as the negotiations happen. And what came out of it is Joe Manchin's the Freedom to Vote Act. And I think we need to be moving forward on this. This is Joe Manchin's baby. And we were told going to get 10 Republican votes. They were going to get Republicans to come on board because in the old days, Republicans wanted people to vote. Well, did they? I keep going back to that Paul Weyrich quote from 1980. And again, a lot of stuff happened during the Reagan era. And I point to that change in thinking, that change in in the direction of the country are morals. Because Paul Weyrich in 1980 gave this speech to 20,000 Baptist ministers in Dallas, Texas, saying, hey, do we want everyone to vote? No, we don't want everyone to vote. We want our people to vote. We want to hold them down and increase our vote because, as he said, our power goes up as the voting populace goes down. The more people we get to the polls, the more we can suppress them, the better we do, because they knew they didn't have the numbers. And they still know that. And this is the MO. This is not new. And also you had the Reagan revolution of hate government. And as I said, it's about hating we the people. Especially if you can throw into we the people the others, which is what the Republicans have done masterfully. But I believe we need something done on the voting reform front, and it's got to happen soon. Because like I said, Republicans they're not hanging around. They're rigging things in states across this country to ensure that it doesn't matter who you vote for, and that's what they want. They want you to think your vote doesn't matter. It's all rigged. They want you to believe that it's fruitless, it's frivolous, it doesn't matter, so that you stay home, so that they don't have to really pull out all the stops that they've been wargaming in their think tanks and in their cloakroom meetings. You think the January 6th coup just came out of nowhere? No. They've been thinking about this stuff for decades. There are constitutional experts who spend days dreaming this stuff up, dreaming up every scenario. And as I said from the beginning, I believe that this is what would have happened in 2016 had Hillary Clinton won. It would have been the same thing. And no election ever will the Republicans ever admit that they've lost. I think we've seen the last, conceding Republican. Because Trump still hasn't conceded, even though at every level he's lost. He's lost in every court. Lost. But the Freedom to Vote Act is something we need. A lot of stuff in this we need. Automatic voter registration. We should, I've often said, as an 18-year-old, I had to go to the post office and sign up for selective service. Why wasn't I handed a voter registration card right then and there? Why wasn't that? I can go off and die for my country, but you didn't register me to vote? So I'm of the mindset that everyone should be registered to vote. As soon as you turn 18, bang, you're registered. We should have it should be much easier. Now, there are a lot of states that do online registration. That's good. I think we should open up same-day registration. Good stuff. I think everyone should be allowed to vote, and then felons included, and that is in this. If you've done your debt to society, if you've done your time, and you're out, you should be able to vote. We should be doing a lot on ensuring that people have access to the ballot box. I'm a big fan of early voting. I'm a big fan of drop boxes. In the last election, I've talked about this before. I voted. I said, yes, I would like a mail-in ballot, please. And they sent it to me. I filled it out. It was pretty simple. I followed all the directions. I signed it, and I dropped it off in a box at the elections office. A couple of days later, they sent me an email. Hey, we got your ballot. You're in. And a couple of days after the election, they said, hey, it was counted. Way to go. I think that was a great system. May do it again. I still do like personally going to the polls and pulling the lever. I think there's something good about that exercise in democracy. But for most people who are really, really busy, it's a good option. I like the fact that this would move us towards a paper-based voting system. I'm a huge supporter of hand-marked paper ballots that are countable. This would move us in a direction to get there. I think we need to go after people who provide false information around election time to try and deceive people. This is part of what's in this bill. There's a lot of stuff. Gerrymandering, the thing that's going on in Tennessee right now. We've got to take this power out of the hand of legislators. It's got to be in the hands of we the people. I believe in participatory democracy. I believe in we the people, even if some of us are crazy. There is a voter ID part of this, and I've never been against voter ID per se. I'm against how it was crafted. I'm against what they say, oh, you can have an NRA card, but you can't have a college ID. Which is insane, but I guess, you got your priorities. When I first registered to vote, my electric bill was enough It's where I lived. I didn't have a driver's license yet because I wasn't driving. Didn't have a car, didn't have a need for a driver's license, but I was 18. Electric bill was enough. It had my name on it, it had my address on it. That was enough for them. If we're going to mandate that people have photo IDs, then there better damn sure be a way to ensure that everyone gets one. And that we do this in a way that it isn't, hey, on the third Tuesday of the fourth month of the seventh year of the 16th century, maybe you get a chance at 6:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 30 seconds. There'll be a window open and you can get. No, we can't do that. And that happens in my state of Pennsylvania, where there are only a couple of days a month where it's open. So if we're going to mandate specific photo IDs, then you got to make that accessible. And this does some of that stuff, which, I'm okay with. The idea is it's going to open up some more information. Transparency is good, like who's paying for all those attack ads. I think you should know who the billionaires behind it is. It does a little bit to create a publicly funded election cycle, which I think is not a bad idea, by creating a small donor-focused matching system, which I think is great, because again, it's getting people involved. This is all stuff that's in here. Prohibits the use of shell companies from funneling foreign money to candidates. We should be following the money of these campaigns. And one of the big ones for me is it ends some of these quid pro quo patronage deals. If you're a federal contractor, we should be knowing if you're giving candidates any time of resource. The Pennsylvania treasurer back a number of years ago, Rob McCord was his name. I'm sure he would have liked to have a much stronger law in place as a deterrent for him not to do exactly that. He was running around, going to state contractors saying, hey, if you want some contracts, you got to give us a campaign donation. I believe he's still sitting in jail, but it was a Herculean leap to get to him. Shouldn't be that difficult. And we need to enforce campaign finance laws. We need to hold people accountable. We need to hold them accountable. Things need to be transparent, and people need to have better access to the ballot box. It's that simple. And the sad reality is, it's probably not going to pass. So got a lot of work to do, the Democrats doing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, does it happen this week? Does it happen at all? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back after this with Representative Andy Levin from Michigan. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Time to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1885. That was the day that Toynbee Hall, the first university settlement house, opened its doors to the poor and working class communities of East London. The Industrial Revolution had created a new set of social conditions, those of high unemployment and slum housing, crime, and infant mortality. The vicar of St. Jude's, Canon Samuel Barnett, and his wife Henrietta hoped to combat poverty by having students settle in with the poor and working class to provide services and fight for social reforms. They named the settlement house in honor of their friend, economist, and labor leader Arnold Toynbee, who helped to organize trade unions and establish public libraries throughout East London. In its early days, Toynbee Hall championed the rights of minority immigrants, including Jews and the Irish, developed adult education and language courses, evaluated industrial working conditions, and provided free legal advice. More aligned with liberal rather than labor politics in Britain, reformers at Toynbee Hall looked to build the health of the nation by fighting for welfare reform legislation. It became a public forum for political debates and historical societies, and blazed the path for the rise of the settlement house movement in Britain and the United States. 3 years after its opening, Jane Addams would open Chicago's famed Hull House. Other settlement houses, like the Henry Street settlement in New York City founded by Lillian Wald, would soon follow. Though bombed in the Nazi Blitzkrieg in 1940, Toynbee Hall continues its vision of a future free from poverty and its mission to support people and communities to break down the barriers that trap them in poverty in a bold, engaged, and open environment to this day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said, big week ahead on many fronts, the voting rights front, but also the January 6th, getting to the bottom of what happened, holding people accountable. And I go back to this. People need to be held accountable for their actions. And I look at Jim Jordan, whose letter on why he's not going to cooperate with the January 6th committee is just, I don't know how a sitting member of Congress can get away with this, but he says that he's got nothing to hide, but he has no relevant information for the committee. And I'm going, I think we, the people, should be the judge of that. I think he most certainly should be sitting in the hot seat and answering questions about his actions in and around January 6th. Just my thoughts. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on where the Democrats are going to be moving forward from this point on. Also, maybe some thoughts on January 6th. I've asked Andy Levin to come talk with us. Andy is a congressional representative from Michigan's 9th Congressional District. Andy, thanks for taking some time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's great to be with you. Good to see you.
So I need you to weigh in on Jim Jordan, but I am curious, what are your memories of what happened a little over a year ago?
Well, I'll never forget that day, Rick. As you said, I represent the 9th District of Michigan, and Michigan was one of the states that was being challenged. So we had prepared the 7 Democratic members from Michigan. We met with Speaker Pelosi, with staff, with attorneys. We were ready to defend the legitimacy of Michigan's election, which was, really, there's no question about it. It was audited, it was challenged in court, upheld multiple times. But anyway, we had made prepared our speeches, and I was in my office getting ready for that, and there came a banging on the door, not a knock. And the only person I had with me because of security and COVID was my chief. He went and answered the door. This Capitol police officer bursts in. We're evacuating the Cannon building. So that was sort of the start of it. And we were evacuated through the tunnels over to another Longworth office building. I ended up spending some time with my good friend Deb Holland, and then with my Michigan colleague, Alyssa Slotkin, because they had offices in the Longworth building. And then we went over, and it was, Rick, this is the first time since 1814, since the War of 1812, our capital, our temple of democracy, was ransacked by a violent mob who had mace, bear spray, all manner of, hand ties and clubs and poles, and they beat police officers. They killed people. It was horrifying. And
can you imagine what would have happened? Can you imagine what would have happened if they'd have gotten hold of you or another member of Congress? Has that gone through your head?
I think I have a defense mechanism, dude. But they would have killed us. If a lot of them would have, and they were obviously looking. They had nooses. They had, all kinds of, and they chanted. They were looking for us, kill us, kill the vice president. So, but here's the thing. The people who invaded, ransacked, trashed our capital, hurt people, must be held accountable. But I'll tell you else who needs to be held accountable. We walked back crunching over broken glass and walking over freshly swabbed up blood into that House chamber. And we were determined to finish our duty, which is just supposed to be a ceremonial celebration of democracy. There was no real decision being made. The people had voted, right? We're just supposed to ratify it. And 147 of my colleagues, despite what had just happened, despite that violence, despite that desecration, voted to nullify the votes of millions of their fellow Americans. They also are insurrectionists.
Yep. No, and that's
then.
No,
yeah,
you're
and
spot
then
on.
you get to the Jim Jordans of the world and others who evidently participated in planning this in some way, or knew about it, or were talking to the White House about it. What we're learning, this select committee has done such a fantastic job. We should have, of course, had a 9/11 commission type of thing, but the Republicans wouldn't do that. So Pelosi said, okay, we'll have a select committee. Then Kevin McCarthy tried to appoint people who were involved in the insurrection. So that was crazy. But we have two brave Republicans and the Democrats on this committee, and they have interviewed hundreds of people, looked at thousands and thousands of pages of documents. A lot of what they found hasn't come out yet because they're organizing it. Yeah. But clearly, a number of my colleagues, including Jim Jordan, seem to have been involved in some way in preparations for January 6th, talking to the White House back and forth, talking to these war rooms, different. So of course he should come forward and testify and be questioned about what he knew.
Yeah, see, I want all of them held accountable. I want the people who defecated on the floor and broke windows, absolutely. But I want the people who organized this. I want the people who funded it. And more importantly, I want the people who are going to benefit from it. And that goes all the way up to Donald Trump himself. I don't think we can move forward unless there is transparency and accountability in this. And I looked at someone like Jordan, especially, who was on that Benghazi committee that I heard for years, two and a half, almost 3 years, we can't move forward as a country until we get to the bottom of this. And yet they're the ones saying now, well, can't we just move forward? Can't we just move on? Can't we all just get along? No, we can't. Just my thought. Anyway, so I'm happy we're moving in the direction. I did want to get your thoughts on some of the other stuff that has to happen. We got to get some voting rights stuff done. I'm hoping the president, who's going to be in Atlanta tomorrow, is going to help move that along. I'm curious your thoughts on do you think the piece of legislation, the voting rights legislation, is going to move through?
Well, I mean, first of all, we can't accept failure. So I'm not at all close to being ready to give up. The situation in the country is super dire on this. The voters across the country are facing discrimination at the ballot box in so many forms, like unlawful purges, shortened voting hours, closing of polling places in low income and minority communities. And, last year, over 19 states passed 34 new laws that create barriers to voting. And in the last couple of years, 389 bills have been introduced in 48 states to restrict voting access, and including in my own state of Michigan, where we have special problems because the legislature can do a weird trick where a referendum is planned, but it doesn't have to actually go to the people. The state legislature can pass it and the governor can't veto it. And anyway, that's if you are interested, it's a crazy quirk of Michigan. But here's the thing, Rick, the House has acted to protect the rights of all American voters. We've passed the For the People Act, H.R. 1. We passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. But these actions have been held up by the filibuster in the Senate. And it's blatant obstructionism. And so it's time to abolish the filibuster as far as I'm concerned. But specifically what's happened over in the Senate is Joe Manchin said, well, H.R. 1 or S1 is too much for me. And I'm a former Secretary of State, so I'm going to write my own law. And I'm going to get 10 Republicans to vote for it. Well, Rick, actually, what he wrote is good enough, brother. It's good enough. It would make Election Day a national holiday. It would have 15 days of early voting, including 2 weekends, automatic registration, motor voter, register up till Election Day, get rid of partisan gerrymandering, and deal with these voter suppression issues and purges of lists, and also deal with this thing going around the country that they want legislatures to be able to overturn the results of elections if they don't like them. I mean, these things are the end of democracy. Okay, exactly. So where are we? Did he get his 10 Republicans? No, he did. Not even close, right? So we're at a point where Joe Manchin and others have to agree on some little tweak to the filibuster to let this get voted on by majority vote. That has been done scores of times. There are many, many exceptions to the filibuster, which after all is only a Senate rule. It's nothing, 50 senators could vote to abolish the filibuster altogether. And they just went around the filibuster in a way like this to deal with the debt ceiling. So don't ask me about predictions. Ask me what I need from everybody who's here and are watching us. Get on your phone, get in your email write a letter,
Absolutely.
get on a bicycle, ride to the Capitol. Everybody raise your voice, march around in the street and say, we must save our democracy. The Senate must pass democracy defending legislation, because whatever they can get through the Senate, we will pass in the House.
No, and that's what's needed. I mean, I've said for a long time, the filibuster has been the reason that the Senate is the place where good ideas go to die, especially if it's something good for working folks. And one of the things I did want to ask you about is the PRO Act, which is something that I've been advocating for a very long time, Andy. It seems like anything that helps we, the working people, doesn't seem to have a chance. And I go back to, I was a Bill Clinton supporter simply because he said, hey, we're going to pass strike replacement. I voted for Barack Obama twice because, hey, we're going to get something better than the Employee Free Choice Act. Looked me in the eye, shook my hand twice. We're getting something better, he said. We got nothing. And this is one of those things that I don't think another administration can go by without some kind of help for working class folks to be able to join and form unions and bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions. I just don't think it can happen.
Rick, there's no, the cause of my life is the workers' freedom to form unions and bargain collectively. It's the only way to increase the voice and power of workers in our society. And, I started out as a union organizer in the early 80s and helped thousands of people form unions with SEIU. And then I was a staff attorney. Bill Clinton wasn't really for labor law reform. Instead of proposing anything, he created a blue ribbon commission. That sucked for the workers of this country, but it was good. It was good for me personally because I got to be the staff attorney to that commission and I learned a lot. But, then Newt Gingrich was elected and to be speaker, and our proposals just gathered dust and Clinton never did anything. Yeah, he tried strike replacement, but so late, he did it way too late and it never really took hold. And then you come to Obama. Here's the point. Since the National Labor Relations Act was passed in 1935, the Wagner Act, Congress has not passed a new law, a paragraph, a damn comma that makes it easier for workers to organize and bargain. And of course, they passed a lot that made it harder, like the Taft-Hartley amendments and parts of the Landrum-Griffin law. And then the courts have stepped in and the states with their right to freeload laws. It's been a disaster. So you are absolutely right. Let me just say three quick things about this. Number one, the most important thing happening is not discussions in Congress, but workers in motion in this country. Because when the Wagner Act was passed in 35, it wasn't because a bunch of genteel Congress people had a lovely conversation. It was because workers were organizing and striking and the bosses were freaking out.
Yep.
And they said, it was like, we think of it as like our foundational labor law. It was a compromise at that time. And so again, you've got Kellogg workers who were struck and got a contract. You got John Deere workers who rejected 2 proposals before they got a contract. You got mine workers in Alabama who've been on strike for months and months and months. You have people forming unions in, e-commerce and, digital media and all this crazy stuff. You got tens of thousands of graduate employees. I once went to jail, or several times went to jail with John Sweeney to demand the right of graduate employees to organize. I think we did it once at Temple and once at NYU. And now NYU's workers have a union. And now the graduate employees of Columbia just got a contract. So, we've got to stand and fight for all workers, but it's when workers are in motion that we'll have a better chance to pass.
I'm right there with
PRO
you.
Act.
Absolutely. I say that the NLRA was a peace treaty more than anything.
Exactly. Now, one other quick thing I got to tell you, because there's not many people even talk about this, but in Build Back Better, we have some important provisions from the PRO Act. So if we could get the Build Back Better Act passed as we had it in the House, we put the penalties from the PRO Act in Build Back Better. So you can't change everybody's rights, but when an employer violates workers' rights, it fits under a budget reconciliation to say, hey, let's get a little more money for the Treasury by socking that employer with an actual meaningful fine for firing that worker or whatever. That puts money in the Treasury. We also increase the fines for violations of OSHA, like tenfold increases, Rick, serious, and violations of the wage and hour. Plus, we put $5 million in there to enact my provision to have electronic voting for workers who want to organize during a pandemic or if it just seems too intimidating to have the election in the employer premises, let people vote electronically. You know that's what they've done under the Railway Labor Act for many years without one scintilla of evidence of fraud or a problem. It saves the taxpayers money because you don't have to send a board agent out to Poughkeepsie or, Phoenix to run the election. So anyway, there's some good stuff, but I am 100% with you. Until we pass fundamental labor law like the PRO Act, we will not rebuild the middle class of the society, full stop. And it's my number one priority in Congress.
No, and thank goodness you're there. And thank goodness you're doing the work you're doing. But to your point about the electronic voting, then Amazon can't have the post office bring a mailbox that they can point a bunch of cameras at to watch who's voting. That's the reason that can't happen. And the fines you talk about, currently the most dreaded part of the fine system is posting a notice and maybe back pay minus anything someone at work. So there's no real penalty. We need those financial penalties, but we also need everything else that's in the PRO Act, in my opinion. Totally. We need to undo the last 40, 50 years of assaults on organized labor and give people the power to join and form and also to collectively bargain. Because, look, we're in a moment, Andy, and you see it. There are 4.5 million people who have left their job. The great resignation. People are leaving. There is chaos. It's just not being reported on enough, and it's not in the streets yet. But at some point, it's going to have to be.
Absolutely. Can I tell you a little story? So I get to Congress right after I first won in 2018. And I get on the Education Labor Committee. The union organizer goes to Congress, right? And I say, well, when is labor law reform going to come up? And somebody said, well, in like 3 weeks. I was like, dang, could I see it before it comes up? Me like a union organizer / labor lawyer. And they go, oh yeah. So they send it to me. Rick, I marked the heck up out of it. I wrote all my little comments. And I said, well, could I meet with the committee staff? And so here comes these committees. They well, no member ever asked to meet with us, So here they come down to my office and we really, put some improvements in there. But I'm telling you, the PRO Act does more, so many things.
We need it.
Workers would, if they fire you because you're trying to form a union, boom, injunction to put you back in there. First contract arbitration, so many things. So we are going to get it done, brother. You and me. And the rest of the working people. Thanks.
Andy, I appreciate the time, man. Great stuff. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Michigan Representative Andy Levin. Make sure you check out the work that he's doing. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was a day of tragedy as the Pemberton Mill collapsed in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The collapse of the 5-story textile mill was one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. Most of the 800 workers in the mill were women and Irish immigrants. Some were teenagers. During that fateful afternoon, as they were working, they heard a strange rattling noise. Then, within seconds, the mill collapsed. Tons of machinery crashed through the collapsing floors, crushing workers. Many more were trapped. Rescuers attempted to free the trapped workers. But that night, as the rescue efforts continued, a fire broke out in the ruined plant. Many trapped workers were burned alive. Helplessly, the rescuers could only look on with horror. The exact number of dead is unknown, but estimates range between 88 and 145 workers killed that day, with another 150 suffering serious injuries. The large building was only 7 years old when it collapsed. Poor construction was determined to be the cause of the disaster. In an effort to maximize profits, the mill had more heavy equipment inside than the building could support. The New York Times reported, the building was never considered to be as staunch as it ought to have been. It was built about 7 years since and was then thought a sham. Indeed, before the machinery was put in, the walls spread to such a degree that some 22 tons of iron plates were put in to save it from falling by its own weight. After the disaster, the mill was rebuilt. Workers at the new mill claimed to see the ghosts of those who had died in the tragedy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, big week ahead. And one of those things that there's a lot on the agenda and a lot that needs to get done in a short period of time, from voting rights to something on moving the child tax credit, moving something that we're going to be able to have Democrats run on this coming year. But it's a big week, especially on the voting rights. And I can't emphasize enough to be calling your representatives and saying, hey, we without question most certainly need to get some stuff done. And here to share some thoughts on how that happens, I've asked Sam Cornale to come talk with us. Sam is the executive director of the Democratic National Committee, Democrats.org, the website if you want to check out some of the work that they do there. Sam, thanks for taking some time for us.
It's great to be having me on.
So I'm looking at the week ahead, and there is a lot of opportunity, a lot of hope. Where are we going this week?
Well, the president and the vice president are headed down to Atlanta tomorrow for a big speech on voting rights. This is yet another step in the march towards historic voting rights legislation that the president has been full-throated about. It's one of their top priorities. As you mentioned, there are several big priorities. This president and this vice president are trying to do big things, and they've already done some absolutely massive things. But down in Atlanta, the president is going to lean further into the fact that we need rules changes to accommodate historic voting rights legislation. In no small measure because democracy is at stake. And the contrast with Republicans could not be more clear. You have one party that is full-throated in their support of voting rights, wanting to make it fair and accessible for everyday Americans to go and cast their ballot through a number of different mechanisms. And you have Republicans who continue to promulgate the big lie. And the big lie that a little more than a year ago caused an insurrection, a violent insurrection at the Capitol, where law enforcement officers ultimately lost their lives. And now that same big lie is driving Republicans across the country to pursue the most extreme anti-voter legislation in a generation. And so tomorrow down in Atlanta, the president and the vice president are going to be full-throated in their support for a historic voting rights package that I am hopeful will ultimately get through Congress.
You and I will agree we need to do something on voting rights. The Republicans have been, well, you got to give them credit. They've been very busy on figuring out how to rig the next election. But if anything is to get done in the Senate, if we are to move voting rights legislation, you're going to have to do something with the filibuster. And the right wing is apoplectic over the possibility of that happen. In fact, Grover Norquist's group put out a statement basically saying that you guys want to destroy one of the pillars of democracy in order to preserve democracy. This is what they're saying your argument is, sort of like a wartime commander saying, we have to destroy a village to save it. They go on to say, but if the filibuster goes the way of the dodo birds, congressional Democrats, that's you, are going to be able to ram through Green New Deal, woke spending. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be horrible. Sam, you're going to do all this horrible stuff.
Well, I mean, you and I both know, Rick, that Mitch McConnell's only measure of success is power. And if you want me to believe that Mitch McConnell won't do everything in his power to get every tax cut for the wealthy, well-connected corporations through, if you don't believe that Mitch McConnell is going to ram as many judges through as possible if he's put back in control of the Senate, I mean, these are crocodile tears. And the reality is that President Biden has been very, very clear that this is specific to voting rights legislation. Because at the end of the day, the filibuster doesn't matter if we no longer have a democracy. And, that not to be overly alarmist, but that's really where we are. You have fake audits in just about every battleground state being pushed by Republicans. In my home state of Wisconsin, Rick, you have Republicans trying to get rid of the entire elections apparatus infrastructure and install their own Republican cronies to be able to determine the outcome of elections, to not let votes matter, but to make sure that the people counting the votes can decide who won or lost. That's not where we are. And so the president, to his credit, after a 40-year career in the Senate, he is an institutionalist. And the fact that President Biden is now saying that we need meaningful reform and changes to the rules of the Senate in order to protect our democracy, that's a huge step forward. He deserves a ton of credit for that. And at the end of the day, the Republicans, they're against everything and they don't stand for anything. And that's the contrast that we are going to spend the next 10 months delivering directly to the American people, from volunteers at the doors and on the phones to our paid media to our organizing efforts. At the end of the day, we have an incredibly strong record to run on. It will be voting rights in part, but not exclusively. We're going to get more done.
No, and this is where I've been saying for the longest time, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad to hear what you're saying, because I think it's important for people to understand that the Democrats maybe are willing at some point to ball up their fists and get in there and throw a couple of punches, because it's been the MO kind of that when you got the keys to the steamroller, it's parked on the side of the road. It's time to lead, get some stuff done. And I know Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, that seems to be the fly in the ointment right now. But things got to get moving. People want results, not excuses.
Well, your listeners shouldn't forget that Senator Manchin has already supported meaningful voting rights legislation. He voted for it on the floor of the Senate. We're going to get something done. There is a deal to be had on the Build Back Better agenda, which would cut costs, expand elder care and child care to make it easier to care for our loved ones in the dawn of their life and the twilight of their life. And on voting rights, this is one of the top issues that this president and vice president are animated by. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I'm confident we're going to get something through. But at the end of the day, the midterms and campaigns generally are about three things, Rick. They're about money, having resources to get your message out, to deliver it to the American people. We've raised more last year than any non-presidential year ever in the history of the DNC. We are matching what the Republicans have done. And as we all know, Republicans are the party of dark money. So that is not nothing that our grassroots are stepping up. Average donation in the low double digits here. The second is our record. Put aside Build Back Better and voting rights and any other additional pieces of legislation that I'm confident we're going to get through this year. We already have an incredible record to run on, Rick. Think about it. The American Rescue Plan cut child poverty in half, $130 billion to schools to help them reopen and do so safely. When President Biden took office, 46%, give or take, of students were attending school in person full time. That's now well north of 90%. We have more work to do. We're going to see this pandemic evolve, and we'll have to respond accordingly. But the American Rescue Plan alone has set this country on a much stronger trajectory. We then passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. Donald Trump spent 4 years talking about how it was infrastructure week. You know who got it done in his first year? President Biden. Right. The unemployment rate down below 4% now. That is the largest single year drop ever in history. More than 6 million jobs created by this president last year. That's the most in the first year of a presidency ever. I mean, I could go on and on and on, Rick.
Yeah,
but the
there's
reality
a lot to unpack there. No, I mean, there's an awful lot in there, but and we're going to get to some of that stuff. But the voting rights thing, my problem with all of it is Joe Manchin wrote the bill. How come this isn't already passed? This is my problem. We were supposed to get the For the People Act. He said, no, I've got something better. I'm going to get 10 Republicans to come along. They didn't. How come this hasn't already passed?
Well, as I just walked through, there's been a lot we've accomplished already. I think part of this is just the challenge of how many crises this administration and Democrats that were put into power in January of last year inherited from Donald Trump and the Republicans. And the reality is I can only articulate what the president, the vice president, and senators from Chuck Schumer to Joe Manchin have said. Joe Manchin, again, voted for that very legislation that you're talking about. And so tomorrow, what the president is going to do is continue to raise the urgency to say now is the time. Majority Leader Schumer has set a hard deadline of next week in order to get a vote on voting rights legislation. And I know, senators like Warner in Virginia and Senator Tester in Montana, they started out in a place where they weren't comfortable with meaningful changes to the filibuster in order to protect voting rights, and now they are on board. So the situation has evolved. Good. And at the end of the day, Rick, I think highly of myself, but I'm never going to purport to be in the middle of those very conversations that you just referenced. But I know they're happening, and I know the president is full-throated in his support and driving the march to meaningful voting rights legislation.
Good, and we can help out by making sure we're calling those senators and letting them know where we're at. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Sam Cornale. He's the executive director of the Democratic National Committee. Democrat.org is their website. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out the Democrats page. You know, you brought up a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot to get through there. And the child poverty thing to me is a huge one. I was, as a kid, grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, in poverty, in American poverty. I mean, we were at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. I can't imagine in the 70s what a couple $100 a month would have done for our lives. And it's, $250 a month to me now doesn't seem like anything. But the fact that it made such a massive difference in the lives of working families and of children in this country just seems like an absolute no-brainer that we would continue it. Now, understand, generally, I'm against the idea of handouts. But when I look at the records of what happened, this seems like it should have already gone through. And I can't understand why, again, Joe Manchin being the guy kind of holding this up.
Well, this is yet another example of President Biden and Democrats reorienting the economy to benefit people who power the economy. And make no mistake about it, that's working people. I was not raised dirt poor by any means, Rick. But, every fall when soccer season started, my brothers and I, I'm one of three, would walk out to the garage and we'd rummage through the box of secondhand soccer cleats. My mom did everything she could to provide for our family. And you're absolutely right that a couple $100 every single month can make a huge difference, saving for college, diapers, food on the table. God forbid, every now and again, families have the opportunity to eat at a restaurant once it's when it's safe to do so. And make no mistake about it, Rick, the American Rescue Plan, which cut child poverty in half, put hundreds of dollars into the pockets of working parents every single month. Every single Republican member of Congress voted against that legislation. And you know what they didn't vote against? The $1.5 trillion kickback to corporations under the Trump tax cut. So that's the contrast we're talking about here, Rick. People want to argue whether it's a handout or not. I'm sorry, but a couple $100 that helps everyday Americans with children put food on the table, stock their pantry, fix the broken roof. I mean, that is not a handout. That is an economy that is finally working for the people who work.
No, when I was a kid, and I go back to this often, when I think about policies, I think about where I came from. And, there were many months throughout the year where at the end of the month, there was literally nothing in the house. And I want that for no child. And as I said, while I'm against the idea of handout programs, this seems, the evidence is there. People used it for the right things. I don't care what the rumor is of what may or may not have been said by Joe Manchin. I don't believe people are buying drugs or doing other things with it. I think people are using that money the way it was meant to take care of their kids and their families.
Absolutely. I mean, again, to go back to the Trump tax cut for a little bit of contrast here, Rick, as your listeners are sitting around, the kitchen table with their family members debating politics, God forbid it comes up. $1.5 trillion, more than 80% of it went to the absolute wealthiest among us in corporations. And what did they use it for? Largely to buy their own stock back, to make more money off of U.S. taxpayer dollars. They made more money. And what we're doing is putting a reasonable amount of money into the pockets of working people that goes right back into the economy. That to me is a contrast, a conversation I am ready and willing to have with the American people.
And one that, absolutely we do need to have, Sam. Now, I did want to get some of your thoughts on last week's anniversary. And I hate to use the word anniversary. I'm not sure what the right word for a horrible, tragic insurrection is. But I wanted to get your thoughts. I mean, we find out last week that the vice president was actually in the DNC when the pipe bomb was found. And yet I keep hearing people telling me, especially my right-wing friends, that it was a patriotic day, Sam. It was a day like any other. It was a good, God-fearing Christian kind of day with people loving their countries. And I think, as the one guy said, they were just out, seeking redress of their grievances. I wanted to get your thoughts.
President Biden had a line that really stuck with me from that day, his speech 4 or 5 days ago, which was, you can't love your country only when you win. And the reality is that for the first time in generations, maybe ever, the Republican Party, the very core of one of the two political parties in the United States, refuses to support, to defend the very democratic ideals that have made America the country that it is. That is jarring. That is absolutely jarring. I'm sorry, but the patriots on January 6th were not those who were wielding Trump flags and beating law enforcement officers. They were the law enforcement officers. The patriots are not people, using fake audits in Arizona to try to change the clear outcome of the election. 81 million votes Joe Biden earned and Kamala Harris earned in 2020. The patriots are the local election officials who are doing everything in their power, despite death threats and despite the Republican National Committee and Republicans across the country refusing to defend them. Those are the true patriots. And so, January 6th was unbelievably unfortunate. I mean, it was sad. Law enforcement officers lost their lives. Others lost their lives. But there's only one political party now that is defending the very democratic principles that make us the beacon of light for the world. And that's the Democratic Party. And, make no mistake about it. Republicans can't win in a fair fight. They know it, Rick. They don't have ideas. They don't have policies that are supported by more than 70% of the American people like Democrats. So what are they doing? They're going and trying to rig the very playing field of democracy. And we're not going to let them happen. We're not going to let it happen.
Which is why we need to get something, especially on the voting rights front, but also the other things. At the end of the day, we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot that needs to be cleaned up, and we need actual leadership in this. So last line of questioning I've got for you, in looking at this, what's the request from us? I mean, I believe democracy is participatory. I believe each one of us have a right, a duty to be involved. What are we asking people to do? What are we telling folks?
Well, there's a lot outside of our control right now, Rick. I feel it, and I'm, the top staff person at the Democratic National Committee. I'm sure you feel it, and you have a huge literal megaphone in front of you. I'm sure your listeners feel it. There's a lot outside of our control. But at the end of the day, there's a ton inside of our control too, within our control. We have power, we have agency right now. And when voting rights passes, when Build Back Better passes, when we are already out there communicating all of our accomplishments to date to the American people, but we still have to go win elections. We still have to make sure that Republicans don't flip state legislatures that are currently in Democratic control. We still have Democratic governors across the country that are the last line of defense. They're the only thing standing between really bad, frankly, kind of nutty Republicans and very good people.
There you go.
Women who need access to reproductive rights, children who deserve a shot at a stronger future, teachers who are on the front lines of everything.
Good stuff, Sam. I got to take a break here. Sam, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Sam Cornale, Executive Director of the Democratic National Committee. Quick break, right back. Two men were killed during a grocery store robbery in Salt Lake City, Utah. Their murders were blamed on Joe Hill, a Swedish-American labor activist, songwriter, and member of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, or the Wobblies. Hill had risen in the IWW organization and traveled widely across the United States. He organized workers under the IWW banner and made many speeches. He was most well known for his writing of political songs and satirical poems. He frequently appropriated melodies from religious songs of his time because they were pretty, but he changed the words so they made more sense. His songs included There Is Power in a Union and Rebel Girl became staples at labor meetings and rallies. In one of his songs, The Preacher and the Slave, he coined the phrase pie in the sky. After the grocery store robbery, Hill was convicted of murder and executed by firing squad. His final word to his executioners, fire. Later, evidence proved Hill was framed for the murders. Just before his execution, Hill wrote a letter to fellow IWW leader Big Bill Haywood. His words have been often repeated at labor meetings. He wrote, "Goodbye, Bill. I die like a true blue rebel. Don't waste any time in mourning. Organize." Hill became a martyr for the cause of working people. His body was cremated in Chicago, and envelopes of his ashes were sent to every state but Utah and all around the world to be ceremoniously scattered. 2015 marks the 100th anniversary of Joe Hill's execution, and the Illinois Labor History Society will partner with labor groups and artists to honor the legacy of Joe Hill.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years
Labor History in
dead.
2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. If you've got a thought, a question, comment, something on your mind, something we've talked about, I'd love to hear it from you. 1-866-416-RICK. I'm looking at Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia, Republican, former Democrat turned Republican, Trump guy. In fact, during the Trump era, that's when he made his grand conversion, which I think a lot of people think Joe Manchin will eventually do. But Jim Jordan last week, he sent a letter to President Biden asking the FDA and the CDC to authorize a fourth dose of COVID-19 vaccines for his elderly population, for his at-risk folks, for, I guess, people over 50 is what he's saying. Those and people who are essential workers, those are folks who should be able to get a fourth dose, because he's saying, look, we're about to get hit with Omicron's wrath. We're about to get, because he said, look, West Virginia is usually a couple of weeks behind. The rest of the country's going through this spike. He's going, look, I want to be prepared for it. And you go, wow, a Republican governor going, well, I care? Wow, I'm literally shocked. And I'm surprised he hasn't been run out of town on a rail, especially in West Virginia, where, sadly, just over 49% of people who are 50 and older have received a booster shot. They're one of the states who did the initial rollout. You got to give him credit. This is a Republican that said, hey, I care about my people enough to get them vaccinated. And now to come out and say, I want a fourth dose to protect the high-risk folks so that we don't blow out our healthcare system. Now, there's part of me that goes, West Virginia's healthcare system is fairly fragile to begin with. You start throwing a whole bunch of people into that system, you collapse it, and that's bad for all of the other things. And again, I go back to what I said from the beginning of this pandemic. This is all about flattening the curve. It's all about making sure that our healthcare system doesn't get overrun and it doesn't implode. This is what Jim Justice is doing, and I give him credit, man. I do. It's rare that I see a Republican doing something that's right. I think he's on the right path, and good for him. I hope that the science says, a fourth dose is needed, because I think at some point we're going to have to, this is going to be like people get the flu vaccine every year. I think it's coming. Story over the weekend that caught my attention. I love the New York Post, because the New York Post is kind of like a joke newspaper. But in their living section, and I love the living section. I love that you would put this story in the living section. The headline, big bold print, unvaxxed couple dies of COVID holding hands. True definition of soulmates. Yeah, this is the modern day Romeo and Juliet. Morons who said, no, I ain't gonna get no vaccine. I'm gonna drink the blood of whatever we'll get to in a minute. They died. And evidently the nurse, wheeled the people into the same room, the couple into the same room. How the story goes, when they put the two people, Bill and Carol's hands together, once they were reunited, one died, and then like 10 seconds later, the other went. And this is a horrible tragedy. I mean, this is avoidable. Had they been vaccinated, probably they may have made it through. But look, 73 and 69 are not spring chickens. But the thing said, at 9:12 p.m., Bill and Carol peacefully passed away, hand in hand with loved ones by their bedside. Aw, such a sweet story. I doubt it was peaceful, because everybody that I've talked to who've watched people die from COVID, it ain't peaceful. The other part of the story that jumps out at you. Now, Bill and Carol have moved on. They're going to the hereafter, and I wish them well in their journey. The rest of the story is every one of the people surrounding them, the 8 family members who were there, they have now tested positive for COVID-19. And you go, but the article does not ask if those 8 folks were vaccinated or not. I got to assume, and this is purely an assumption, and I hope I am wrong, but you got to assume that they're not vaccinated either, since they seem to be quite proud of the fact that this is a love story. As soon as they touched hands, my father took his last breath, and then my mother 10 seconds later. It's a love story. No. This is an education problem story. This is a fear-mongering story. This is the kind of stuff that should be avoided, should be ridiculed, no, this isn't what we want. This is not something you promote. Just like my next story. Now, again, I've had people say that, they're doused in the blood of Jesus and they believe and they have all this theory. There's the, go down to the Tractor Supply and get the industrial size ivermectin and if a little's good, a lot's better. There is that. This guy, this Christopher Key, this is it. This is the best part of it. Christopher Key is, I guess, an anti-COVID-19. He's been identified as anti-COVID-19 vaccine police leader. So that's who he is. He has a novel idea. I got to be honest, the ivermectin makes a little sense on a certain level. You go, okay, hey, it might work. I mean, from some of the reports that I've heard, if you take too much of it, you get explosive exit from where. So you hope you're wearing brown pants when that happens. But this is beyond me. This is beyond my ability to, and it makes me wonder what it is about conservatives and kooks that go in this direction. But the ivermectin, if you're Joe Rogan and you have a doctor who's saying, take this dose, okay, maybe. All of the medical experts I've talked to says it doesn't help at all, and it's a waste, and you're exposing yourself to something that you shouldn't. But hey, if you're under the supervision of a doctor and they want to give it to you, God bless you. Just don't go down to the local horse farm and get yourself the industrial size. Not meant for you. And if you do, take video because I want to see the explosions. But this guy, Christopher Key is his name. Evidently for 23 years he's been doing this. But his solution to COVID-19 is the antidote, he says, is urine therapy. That's right. That's right. He's going, for 23 years, he's been drinking his own urine. He's been 23 years drinking his own urine. And what is it about conservatives and bodily functions? I mean, you got the people who, went into the Capitol, the insurrectionists, defecating on the floor and smearing it on the walls. You got, the Trump with the possible P-tape in Russia. And we've heard hundreds of these stories of the past. I remember the Southern minister who they found him with a rubber suit on because he was into the water sports stuff, with a marital aid inserted into the dark side of the moon, if you get where I'm going with this, while he was strung up in one of those autoerotic asphyxiation kind of contraptions, and he ended up dying. Not the way I assume he wanted to be found, but he was a guy who was, total homophobe, all of this stuff, repressed, all of this. And I think that's what it is. I think it's the religion that gets them into the forbidden. But I'll tell you, I have no idea where you go. How we cure COVID? We drink our pee. I don't know how you go there. I don't know who sells you this idea. I got a giant yellow jar. I'm sorry. I just don't. I don't get it. I don't get it. Let's see what Alice has got to say on line one. Alice, how are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm not getting the pee story. I'm sorry.
Well, I heard that and I had to laugh. My conclusion on that was they must have picked that up because in Japan there's some weird guy over there that had been claiming that drinking your urine helped keep you young. But if that was bad enough, my friend that lives in Colorado was telling me that she was reading an article where Tucker Carlson was touting, believe it or not, Viagra as a cure for COVID. I was like, really? I don't get that one.
I've never heard that one, so I'm not. I've heard Tucker say a lot of dumb things. I'm not going to pin that on him. But it's probably true if you're saying it, but that's well. Hey, you know, it is what it is.
I thought, what's it going to do? Make all the little germs go all rigid and die, or they're all crazy. That's my theory.
Yeah, no, and I would argue repressed as well. So that all goes crazy, repressed, and all of that seem to go hand in hand with extremism.
Yeah, it does. It's just crazy. But I was, we don't live that far from West Virginia, probably about 20 miles, and I know that they're being hammered, and I have no doubt that they're going to have to try and come out with a fourth booster,
No, he's asking for it. He said, "Look, we want it for our people," and I give Jim Justice credit for this. And look, I give him credit for a couple of things. I think he's kind of crazy. I'm not fond of him, but he came out on this, and I think is right. He's come out and said that right to work didn't work for West Virginia. That doing away with prevailing wage laws didn't work for West Virginia. He said, "Look, we did all these things we told it was supposed to work. It doesn't work." I give him credit for at least if something isn't working, he's going to say that it isn't working. No, he's not going to change it, but at least he's going to point it out.
Yeah, at least he's doing that. Well, you have a nice evening, Rick.
Thank you, Alice. I appreciate it. Good stuff. If you got a thought, give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is one of those interesting stories that I got to throw out there. You may remember that this Jesse Waters, basically did this spiel at one of those right-wing conferences in Arizona, saying that, now, I'm not saying he said that he wanted Anthony Fauci to be ambushed and shot dead, but the words that he chose to use for the simple and the dim would be to, ambush, the death shot, the kill shot he used, the language. For the simple-minded who don't understand nuance, they could be, brought to action. Now, this is one of those things where you go, on the left, if something like this would happen, oh my gosh, it would be the end. They would cancel them. They would fire that person. You'd never hear from them again. They would be off. And honestly, rightly so. For someone who does something like that, we don't want them to be at the head of the line. But Fox News, oh no. Fox News never considered to fire him, as a lot of people were calling for, including Dr. Fauci himself. And in fact, Fox News didn't just not fire him, they have promoted him. He is now going to be in the 7 o'clock time slot. And I guess this is instead of, I guess it's going to be called, instead of Fox News primetime, it's going to be Jesse Waters primetime. And I guess they're pitching this as kind of somewhat news-ish. And this is where I go back to this thing where the right fails upward. If you remember during the Bush years, you had all these failed people in the administration, and they would do bad things, bad outcomes would happen, and then they get promoted. They would move up to the next step because they were moving the ball along. While the rest of us looked at their failures and go, "Oh, this is horrible." Different metrics over there. And part of it is, loyalty to the crown, because in their world, democracy doesn't matter. And not ratting people out, kind of like the mafia, just a little bit. But I look at this and I go, this is perfect MO for right-wing organizing. They always seem to fail upwards. And no accountability ever. Because the one thing you noticed, there was never, "Oh, hey, we're sorry, I used the wrong words. Oops. I probably should have." There was none of that. And there never will be. This is one of the signs of authoritarians. They never apologize. Whereas as Democrats who want to be sensitive to other people's needs and want to be decent human beings, they're forever, apologizing. You have to understand who we're dealing with. These are people who, while we're talking about, love of country and of Constitution and making life better for others, it's all about hooray for me and the heck with everybody else on the other side. That's who Democrats have to deal with. So while I do spend a lot of time beating up on Democrats, because I've got a couple of emails from people, why are you always picking on Democrats? They're trying, and they are. They're trying. But how do you deal with people who are willing to burn the house down? How do you deal with people who literally hate everything you stand for? We're going to take back America. We love America, except for all the people who live there. That seems to be the right-wing mantra. We love America, but we want to change everything about it. Fun and interesting times. Now, you may remember on January 6th, Ashley Babbitt was shot and killed because she, was going where she shouldn't have been. And I'll tell you, I'm surprised there weren't more people who were shot and killed on that day. But evidently, she's now a right-wing star. In fact, in Russia, she's something of a star as well. In fact, a Russian state TV reporter was at the Capitol on Insurrection Day as well. And here recently, basically, I guess he just recently went up to Jamie Raskin and asked him if he believed that January 6th was a planned attack by the FBI and radical Democrats. And he asked him, are you investigating this? And Raskin said, give my regards to Vladimir Putin, which I thought was a great line. But he was one of these guys out there pushing that, Ashley Babbitt's a martyr and that, the democracy's falling. And the Russian propaganda that's coming out of this is scary. And all for the benefit of Putin and that Russian government. And what's frightening to me and scary to me is you've got Trump supporters who are all in. You've got some Republicans who seem all in on this. And, I was reading an article on the story of this Russian TV station that, basically all propaganda, and that they were saying that Fox News is the most frequently showcased American show on these Russian channels. That the propaganda and the America hate that comes out of it is what the Russians are using for propaganda. And I find it just ironic that the people who tell me that they're the patriots, that it's the Russians using their propaganda. Very bizarre. Love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. Quick break right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1885. That was the day that Toynbee Hall, the first university settlement house, opened its doors to the poor and working class communities of East London. The Industrial Revolution had created a new set of social conditions, those of high unemployment and slum housing, crime, and infant mortality. The vicar of St. Jude's, Canon Samuel Barnett, and his wife Henrietta hoped to combat poverty by having students settle in with the poor and working class to provide services and fight for social reforms. They named the settlement house in honor of their friend, economist, and labor leader Arnold Toynbee, who helped to organize trade unions and establish public libraries throughout East London. In its early days, Toynbee Hall championed the rights of minority immigrants, including Jews and the Irish, developed adult education and language courses, evaluated industrial working conditions, and provided free legal advice. More aligned with liberal rather than labor politics in Britain, reformers at Toynbee Hall looked to build the health of the nation by fighting for welfare reform legislation. It became a public forum for political debates and historical societies, and blazed the path for the rise of the settlement house movement in Britain and the United States. 3 years after its opening, Jane Addams would open Chicago's famed Hull House. Other settlement houses, like the Henry Street settlement in New York City founded by Lillian Wald, would soon follow. Though bombed in the Nazi Blitzkrieg in 1940, Toynbee Hall continues its vision of a future free from poverty and its mission to support people and communities to break down the barriers that trap them in poverty in a bold, engaged, and open environment to this day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
One 416 Rick 1-866-416-7425. I want to give a quick shout out to the folks at Teamsters Local 776 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Good on them. You may remember, the big hurricane that went through, the big tornado. I'm sorry, it wasn't a hurricane. The big tornadoes. It's usually hurricanes. The huge tornado that moved through western Kentucky and through that region of the country back on December 10th of last year. Well, a couple of members of Teamsters Local 776 got together and said, hey, we want to help the folks there in Kentucky. They got together with a number of the volunteer organizations in the area, and they collected donations and all kinds of stuff. And Teamsters Local 776 donated the use of their truck, and they paid the expenses and all of that to get this stuff moved down. And I wanted to throw them a little bump because the mainstream media never gives unions and their members the credit that I think they deserve when they do the things that they do to help others. One of the things that Teamsters Local 776 says is they're people helping people, and this is what they do, and they never ask for any thank you or any congratulations, which is why I want to throw it out to the folks there, the president Ed Thompson of the local, and the folks Rich Stover and his wife Linda, who put all this together, a member of the union to help those people. Some of the interesting photos, and we can maybe get some of that on social media. They took an entire 53-foot trailer of stuff down to help folks get through, shop vacs and cleaning supplies and you name it, generators, work lights, all kinds of stuff that were donated by the community to make sure that the folks there get some help in rebuilding. Again, people helping people. So good on them. Good on Teamsters Local 776. And if you've got a story like this, I most certainly want to hear it. I don't think the mainstream media does enough to congratulate and to recognize the work that workers do and the help that people do for each other. So you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com, if you've got any of those stories locally. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. So interesting story. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says that evidently they're going to strip Democrats of their committees if they take power in 2022. He singled out Ilhan Omar, Adam Schiff, and Eric Swalwell, which you go, okay. I'm glad you've let us know who your targets are. Now understand this is payback. Now it's not that Omar or Schiff or Swalwell have done anything that they can point to. It's that, well, you did it to us, we're going to do it to you. And this is why another reason, and I go back to throwing Marjorie Trader Green off of her committee. She was off, I guess, the education and I think labor as well. She was on off the health and labor, the HELP committee, the education and labor committee. I was against it, and I took a lot of heat from people. No, we need to hold her accountable. No, and I'm like, that's not your job. It's not your job, Democrats. Don't do the dirty work for Republicans who, most reps don't want her around anyway. Hang that albatross around their neck and make them wear the Boberts and the Greens and the Gates and the Gosers. Make them wear that. They've always had the Louis Gohmerts or the Stephen Kings or the Michelle Bachmans, which have always been funny and crazy. And, these people are just plain mean and destructive. And I'm like, you want them there. If I'm on the education committee, and I've said this 1,000 times, and I'll probably say it another 1,000 times. If I'm on the education committee and we're debating whether we need more money spent for education, if she's on the committee, I point to her and I go, right here, man, Exhibit A. Literally one of the dumbest people in Congress. Same thing with Boebert. I want them on those committees. I want their insanity front and center. But this is what it's going to turn into. And Republicans have already told you, if they take power, they're going to throw people off of committees. And they're going to impeach Joe Biden. They've already said it. It's the quiet part out loud. They've already said that that's the route they're going. That's the direction that they want to go. It's going to happen. Now, the fun part for me, and this is where as an observer of the game politics, I'm interested in how far will Republicans go? If you give them the rope, will they hang themselves? Would they really go as far to impeach Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and appoint Donald Trump as Speaker of the House so he can go back as president, so that they can fulfill what the right-wing crazies have been telling me? Donald Trump's coming back. We're going to install him. Not that we're going to elect him. We're going to install him. And I love that word. Going to install him. It's crazy. But these are people who have these bizarre beliefs. As you go back to January 6th, how they've rewritten that history. And Marjorie Taylor Greene's one of them. I want to know what she did. I want to know how deep she's into this mess. But she's been running around saying that, all the people who are being held in jail in D.C., that they're all being held in concentration camps and it's just horrible conditions. And my favorite, and I've had this thrown at me so many times, well, none of those people have been actually charged. Yeah, they have. All of them have charges against them. They wouldn't be sitting in jail without the charges that long. Wouldn't have happened. They are charged. They are awaiting their trial. What I find really interesting, and this is an education moment, this is an opportunity. I look at all crises as an opportunity. This is an opportunity because I guarantee you every one of those people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of them saying, well, they haven't been charged and it's deplorable conditions. And look, I think our jails are horrible. I think treating people like that, putting them in solitary is horrible. I think the whole system is archaic. There's got to be better ways. But these are the people, I guarantee it. These are the people who are saying, prison's not tough enough. They've got gyms and they've got swimming pools and they got color TV and they really got their minds in this place that somehow, Club Alcatraz, that it's some kind of paradise. And now they're finding out, oops, wasn't everything we thought it was caught up to be. Oops, this is really bad. Which is what people like me have been saying for years. That we do need prison reform. We do need a system that takes people, puts them into jail where they come out worse than when they went in. That doesn't seem to be working, and it hasn't worked for a while. But I find it interesting that in this moment, you got a bunch of, and I'll say it, suburban white people who finally know what jail is like, surprised. And maybe that's the place where major reform comes from. I don't know. There's an opportunity here. There really is. But I'm hoping that there's awakening. I'm hoping that we, the people, we, the voters, look at this and say, look, this kind of tit for tat, this kind of revenge politic isn't helping us. It's not helping you. It's not helping me. It's just scoring political points in a game. I was having this conversation earlier today with a friend, and we were talking about, the sad reality, and we've had this before, is that, politics has turned into team sport. I bought the sweater. I've got the hat. I've got the chip bowl with the logo on it. And we don't talk about policy anymore. I have Joe Walsh on the program, former congressman from Illinois. I have him on, fairly often, and we have really good, productive conversations. Generally agreeing that Donald Trump was the worst thing that ever happened to this country, and that this whole authoritarian move is bad for the Constitution. It's bad for democracy. We agree on that, and that is great. It's great that there are people who can agree on things again, even people who are on different sides of the political spectrum. But we both agree that we're not going to agree on every issue. And I would love to be able to sit down with Joe and just debate issues. How do we make life better for people? How do we make sure that no kid goes to bed hungry? Because even he agrees, children shouldn't go to bed hungry. I don't know how you can be against that statement. Veterans shouldn't be homeless. No one should be homeless. There should be places for people to go if they're down on their luck. And they shouldn't be horrible places either. I think back to a number of years ago, we did we used to do these Hungry and Homeless for the holiday food drives, where I would live in a cardboard box for, like 10 days in a supermarket parking lot to get people to come and bring food and donations so that we could help the local food bank and the local homeless shelter. And we did it for a number of years. And there was a guy who, conservative Republican his entire life, got sick, had a heart attack, and then, a whole slew of things that went with it. He ended up losing his job, had no supplemental income, couldn't afford his apartment anymore, couldn't afford his living expenses. But our government made sure that he got the health care he needed through Medicaid, and thank goodness that was there for him. But he lost everything else. The Social Security disability took months to get. It was a long, arduous process. And when you're already homeless, it's kind of hard to go through that process. So there he was, homeless, and I said, "Well, I'll help you get to one of these places for homeless people." And he's like, "No, that place is horrible. I want no part of that." He was willing to sleep in a parking lot in the middle of the middle of winter, than go to one of the places that had been designated because it was a violent place. And I'm like, we have the resources, we have the ability, we can change that. We just don't have the will. And it's like any of these issues. I believe that with the right will, and you talk to average, everyday people, we all want kind of the same stuff. It's when you start getting into the oligarch class, the ultra wealthy, our Republican intellectuals, the intelligentsia, where they start telling us, no, that will harm people's ability to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or the Joe Manchin thing. Sorry, we can't give families $250 a month to end childhood poverty, because they'll just use it on drugs and booze, which is generally the right-wing mantra for, we're not going to help anyone, because they'll just misuse it. When we've done the studies, we know when you give people resources like that, they use it on the things that they need to use it on: food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, that stuff. Now, me personally, I have always been opposed to handout programs. I'm against welfare programs, have been since I was a little kid. The most degrading moments of my life, and I was 8 years old, I remember it like it was yesterday, was having to go into a store and use that clown money food stamps to buy stuff from the store. The most degrading moment was the woman behind the cash register just making a scene that everybody, and I still remember it. I am against handout programs. What I am in favor of is job programs. And this is where, for me, all of this comes back to work. All of this comes back to labor. It comes back to dignity and respect in what you do. I don't care what you do for a living. If you get up every day, you go to work, you work hard, you play by the rules, you should get ahead. I grew up believing that was possible, and I still think it is, with the right policies. And we've got to find that. So we got to get back to talking about policy. We got to get about talking about how do we get things done. While we're talking about filibuster reform, we're not talking about getting things done. When we were arguing all of last year whether the Build Back Better plan should be $6 trillion or 3.5 or 2.2 or 1.7 or 1.5 or whatever, we were talking about the need for the things that were in it. Because it's a distraction. It's meant to keep us at each other. It's meant to keep us divided, pitted, sliced, diced, so that we don't come together and go, you know what, we want to end childhood poverty. How do we do that? We want to make sure that we have the best infrastructure in the world. How do we do that? We want to make sure we have the best education system in the world. How do we do that? We want to make sure that everyone gets access to health care so that if they're sick, they don't have to worry about if they're going to go broke or not. How do we do that? What is the best way forward on those issues? Instead, we're bickering over stuff that's not even in the realm of those issues. We're not even in the stadium. I want to get to talking about what's between the hash marks. Because that's how people's lives get better. It's what my grandparents' generation understood. And it's how they were able to build the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. You heard Andy Levin in the last hour talking about the National Labor Relations Act. And he's right. It wasn't everything that the folks then wanted. Wasn't even close. I argue it was a peace accord because the working people of this country were literally tearing the country apart because they were demanding better. And sadly, we're not there yet. We're still being manipulated by the moneyed interest to hate those people. And you could define those people however you want, whatever subsection that you're being told to hate today. I don't have those. When I think about it, I go, how can if their family does better, maybe mine will too. And maybe both our kids will have opportunities. Maybe as a country we can move in a positive direction instead of hooray for me and the heck with everybody else. And that's the mastery of the Reagan era, the mastery of it's all about the individual. It's not about we the people anymore. I mean, when you think about those words, it's power. It's powerful. When we the people come together, we can accomplish things. We can do things. And that scares the living bejeebus out of the Bezoses and the billionaire class. At some point, the pitchforks may come out. At some point, we may unite and go to the voting booth, which is why our Republican friends are doing everything they can possibly do right now as we speak to rig future elections, to make sure that you don't get the chance to vote. Now is the time to make sure that you are registered, make sure you're following up in your state and local area, making sure you're registered, making sure where your polling place is, and committing to voting, not just in this election, but every election. Just my thoughts. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was a day of tragedy as the Pemberton Mill collapsed in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The collapse of the 5-story textile mill was one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. Most of the 800 workers in the mill were women and Irish immigrants. Some were teenagers. During that fateful afternoon, as they were working, they heard a strange rattling noise. Then, within seconds, the mill collapsed. Tons of machinery crashed through the collapsing floors, crushing workers. Many more were trapped. Rescuers attempted to free the trapped workers. But that night, as the rescue efforts continued, a fire broke out in the ruined plant. Many trapped workers were burned alive. Helplessly, the rescuers could only look on with horror. The exact number of dead is unknown, but estimates range between 88 and 145 workers killed that day, with another 150 suffering serious injuries. The large building was only 7 years old when it collapsed. Poor construction was determined to be the cause of the disaster. In an effort to maximize profits, the mill had more heavy equipment inside than the building could support. The New York Times reported, the building was never considered to be as staunch as it ought to have been. It was built about 7 years since and was then thought a sham. Indeed, before the machinery was put in, the walls spread to such a degree that some 22 tons of iron plates were put in to save it from falling by its own weight. After the disaster, the mill was rebuilt. Workers at the new mill claimed to see the ghosts of those who had died in the tragedy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it looks like another Democrat has announced his retirement. Democratic Representative Ed Perlmutter. He's decided, gonna pack it in. He is from Colorado, one of Denver's western suburbs. That makes him like the 26th Democrat that has announced that they're not going to be seeking re-election. Now he's a 68-year-old guy. It's time for retirement, time for some newer blood, but it seems like some writing might be on the wall. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day. Asked our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney to come talk with us. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So what do you make of number 26? Is that unusual for this kind of a cycle?
I mean, it happens. I don't know exactly historically how we look back at the numbers, but I can remember in the course of the last decade or so of doing radio, I can remember when it was on the Republican side, and now it's tending to be on the Democrat side. I mean, if you look at some of the names of the people retiring in 2022, you've got, for example, Lucille Roble Allard, who I serve with. That's a seat that will be picked up, and so you can go down through them. Pete DeFazio, in Oregon, but then again, you start to look at some of these, of course, and that will take a different turn. They will become competitive seats, but this does happen, especially I think during a time like this when there's a lot of controversy, a lot of people are angry, and members that are serving are saying, "Okay, I'm a little tired of it. I've been in X amount of time, and I'm gonna leave."
Yeah, I mean, there's the time where you're tired and you got to move on, and then there's sadly the time where you go, I'm probably going to be shown the door, and nobody wants to take a whipping.
That happens too. Yeah. And remember, of course, as you know, this is a redistricting cycle.
That too, and I look at like something like Tennessee. I don't know if you saw the story coming out of Nashville, that it looks like what the Republicans there are doing is they're going to slice and dice Nashville up, where Democrats probably going to lose another representative out of that state.
Right, and as they do the census, because a lot of people have said to me, well, if Ohio didn't lose population, why are we losing a member? Well, because we didn't gain, for example, as much as another state.
Yep.
And then you have, for example, Tim Ryan in Ohio, who I think has been a tremendous member of the House. I served with Tim Ryan, and the legislature in Ohio is going to do something with his seat that, could Tim Ryan win? I mean, he's really aggressive and a good campaigner, I think, and a good member, but, he's got to be looking at it saying, okay, the legislature in Ohio is Republican-controlled, and they're going to, combine something, and, he's got to make his decision on other choices.
Yeah, which is why he was running for Senate anyway, but
correct.
And I'm hoping he does well in Ohio. It would be great to have. I'm a huge fan of Sherrod Brown. It'd be great to have Tim Ryan as well.
Right. So those are decisions that are made on this cycle. Obviously, there's a lot of Democrats, but also competitive seats. That doesn't mean that the Democrat side is doomed, but I think, for the sake of the Democratic Party, the activists have to get the message out to people that it's not going to be a pleasant year. I mean, to just say, it's okay, you hear all this, we're going to be perfectly fine, then gives the attitude, well, you really don't have to do much, do you? You don't have to contribute, you don't have to talk. But you do, because it's going to be a difficult year. This is a polarized country, and just going to be one of those things where people have to campaign.
It's going to be a lot of interesting days in the next couple of months. Sure. That's for sure. I also wanted to get your thoughts on South Dakota Senator Mike Round's comments over the weekend. He was making it very clear he was not on the Trump train, on the conspiracy theory about the election being stolen. This can't go well for him.
Well, this is happening, and this is going to happen, more often, I think, as time goes on, with the Republican side, of course. And if you look back at what he said, Senator Rounds of South Dakota, as you mentioned, and he's saying, hey, I'm standing by my statement that President Trump lost the election. And, of course, Trump, if you say that, he's going to go after you and that you're an idiot and you're a liar and et cetera, and he's very disappointed. Now, we'll have to see what type of action Trump tries to take on people, which, by the way, I mean, if you read Mitch McConnell's statements, of course, we all remember right after the vote to certify the president what he said and how he called Mitch McConnell names and said McConnell's got to be thrown out. But with the senator from the Dakotas here, he's staying by his statement. Now, if Trump wants to start to engage everybody, which he potentially could or would, that makes a comment that he doesn't like about the election process, then he's going to cause an internal fight, which will, frankly, be to the benefit of the Democratic side.
Yeah. No, it's going to be interesting to see how this all
Trump
plays out.
Losing some of these races.
Because he went as far as say the election was fair as we've seen, which that is not the company line.
Well, right. Of course, that was the line of the Trump Justice Department, which Trump's own Justice Department.
Yeah, wasn't that why he was trying to fire all of them?
Crane came out and said that this was one of the better elections in recent history as far as the reduction of fraud. So I mean, but this is going to be going on, and I think at least for Senator Rounds, we've got to give him some credit that he didn't try to say, well, I really kind of meant this or that. You do that, then you're into a huge trap. One of the things about Donald Trump, whether it was the statement on John McCain and Trump-like people that didn't, wreck planes or the faces of the female candidates he was running against. I mean, no matter what it was, no matter how outrageous it was, one thing about it would just keep going on and wouldn't back down, even when, he potentially should say something.
Yep. And
so it kind of teaches you a lesson not to say what Trump said, but I think in this senator's case, that, had he tried to vary from it, then he's in trouble for saying it with Trump in the first place, and then he's in trouble with the media for trying to alter what he said.
Yep. No, look, the only time, and you can disagree with me, but the only time Republicans get into trouble is when they apologize. And I look at this Jesse Waters story. The language he used at that conference in Arizona, kill shot, ambush, all of this stuff, while everyone who watched the video go, yeah, he's in a way he's talking about using video and capturing, him in a statement, but the language he used, for the dim who may not understand nuance was violence. And, he didn't apologize for it, and now he's been promoted. He's going to be the key guy at 7 o'clock there on Fox.
Right. And so a lot of people will hold to what they've said. I don't know how members that are sitting as current members, I'm talking about the Republican side, can walk through the halls and look the staff in the face or their own staff in their offices and try to say, yes, well, I made the statement that, these were just people wanting selfies and I'm holding to that. I don't know how they do it. Some of them have done it, and they're always going to hold that position. But, yeah. I mean, it was what it was that day. And I think at least if you made that statement, just like McConnell made that speech afterwards, he made it, and Trump's going to try to take him out, and let's see what happens. But again, Trump going in combat with Republicans cannot be, in the end, helpful. Look, even though right now the edge is towards the Republican side, the edge, and there's still a long time, if this gets to where Trump is seriously engaged with Republicans fighting them starting this year, it could make a a difference in enough races.
Yeah, it could make it interesting.
Good.
I also wanted to get your thoughts on, because look, I think the Republicans keep shooting themselves in the foot by saying out loud what they're going to do and what they mean. And we heard Ted Cruz saying that the Republicans are going to impeach Donald Trump, and now you've got Kevin McCarthy saying that he's going to strip Democrats of their committee assignments if Republicans gain control. And he points out Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Schiff of California, and Swalwell of California. Those are the targets. This has got to be one of those things Democrats have to be using as a way to kind of encourage middle of the road Republicans, a way to go, hey, is this the kind of system you want, or does this play for Republicans?
Well, this one on this case it's not going to matter if it plays for Republicans or not. What McCarthy has done is he has picked out for the Republican side, some people who, when you bring up their name, is going to be throwing gasoline in the fire.
Right.
Ilhan Omar, and of course Adam Schiff because of his role with the impeachment, and then Eric Swalwell because of some controversy with China and some security issues. So he's picking out something where he can say, this is McCarthy, when I say he, where he can say, Rick, this is why I'm saying this, because there was questions about Swalwell and security, and we all know the statements about Jewish people and interests by Ilhan Omar, so he's picking that out. Now, I'm going to argue that he doesn't really care about playing to the Republican base. I'm going to argue he's playing to the Republicans on the Hill. McCarthy's in trouble already. Number one, they shouldn't be debating who's going to be the speaker before you have the speakership.
Yeah.
Number one.
That whole eggs in the basket thing.
Yeah, don't do that. But they are. And so what he's trying to do right now is feed red meat to the Republican caucus. I don't even think he cares about the hinterland out there. Right now he's trying to say to the caucus, yeah, put me in and I'll do this. Now, I do believe from day one that it was wrong of the Democratic side to remove a Republican from a committee, just as I believe it's wrong for the Republican side to remove a Democrat from the committee, unless there's certain offenses that occur, and no matter how much we don't like what statements are made, you got to be careful doing this. And now McCarthy will say, well, you see, I have the right to do this because Speaker Pelosi did it. I have the right to do it. But he's really throwing the red meat to the conservatives who are criticizing him, both privately and publicly, to say, no, I'm going to be tough. Look what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the ones you don't like the most.
Yeah, I don't think he's got a chance. Just my thought.
I think he's in trouble.
If I had betting money, I'm going with Jim Jordan because the crazy wants him. But we'll see. I mean, it's a big caucus, and we'll see where it ends up.
Well, some members are afraid of Jordan. Some aren't. But you've got a group of members that some of them are afraid. But McCarthy, again, for sure, is in trouble. So I view this more as he's really throwing the red meat out there to try to secure some support from within Capitol Hill.
Yeah, you're talking about who the speaker is going to be is kind of a moot point at this point because they haven't won yet. But it'll be interesting to see when this plays out and how it plays out.
Right.
But Bob, as always, I appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney. No, seriously. I mean, I look at this and, like Bob said, I was against throwing Green off of the committee, and as I explained earlier, for a number of reasons, but this being part of it, giving McCarthy the ability to go and say, "No, well, you did it. We're going to do it back," and then having this kind of dysfunctional fight, not good, and it's not good for getting things done. Just that simple in my view. But this is, I guess, why you play the game, so to speak. Now on the Jim Jordan front, I think Trump would. There's part of me that goes Trump would want him as the speaker because he's vicious, but there's part of me that goes maybe not because I don't think he's trustworthy. And that's an interesting view. Now remember, he was one of the people on the Benghazi committee. He was one of the people going after Hillary Clinton and, going through the whole, 11 and a half, 13 hours of testimony where they tried everything in the book to try and get her caught in a lie and she came out of that stronger than when she went in because she was honest. And she fought through it, and good on her. I find it interesting that Jim Jordan refuses to testify, refuses to help, refuses to add anything. And I'm of the mindset that if he's not going to voluntarily come and cooperate, just like Sean Hannity, just like my congressman, Representative Scott Perry, if they're not going to come and voluntarily, answer questions, then you subpoena them. You make them, you compel them to sit in that seat. The time for Mr. Nice Guy, well over. It's time to grab these people with the sergeant of arms, throw them in the seat, and force them to, hey, you want to plead the fifth? You have the constitutional right to do that. But the American people are going to watch it. They're going to see you. They're going to hear you say, I plead the fifth for my protection. I'm not going to answer this question because I'm not going to self-incriminate myself. Because the thing of the matter is, Liz Cheney still has his texts, I guess. Liz Cheney's still going to be able to say what happened on that day. And there are other people who are going to go, how did Jim Jordan get all this, the memos and stuff? How is that just floating around? I'm hoping Democrats get a little more spiny. I'm hoping they put a little more grit, a little more anger into their punch. But lots and lots of stuff going on this week. As I said, call your representatives, call them early, call them often. Let them know we need the Voting Rights Act passed. We need to get that moved and moved quickly. Because as I've laid out today, the Republicans are not waiting. They're not playing Mother May I. They are moving quickly to rig the next game, the next election, your election. If you missed any of today's program, get the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. Get the app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Corporate America has proudly elevated good moral values to a special place. That place is the trash can. Indeed, free market gurus assert that the only ethical obligation a corporation has to society is to deliver as much profit as possible to its big investors. Everybody else be damned. And they excuse any awfulness they cause by claiming that they, quote, broke no laws. But hello, they write the laws, so corporate immorality is always technically legal. America experienced this corporate dodge just before Christmas, when a line of supercell tornadoes ripped through the Midwest, demolishing buildings and whole towns, killing more than 90 people. It was called a tragedy, but those deaths were not destiny. We're not helpless in the face of tornado fury, for an effective, cheap defense is readily available. Safe rooms. Built inside schools, factories, shopping centers, and other buildings, people can safely shelter there during big blows, surviving even if the building around them is shredded. They've been proven to provide, quote, near absolute protection from tornadoes, and it's long been proposed to amend building codes to require them in new commercial and public buildings. Such a provision would have saved many workers who were crushed inside an Amazon warehouse, a candle-making factory, and other buildings destroyed by December storms. But they died because members of a little-known industry-controlled group, the International Code Council, had quietly vetoed the proposal, calling it overly restrictive and even declaring it's way too soon to do a knee-jerk reaction to tornado deaths. This is Jim Hightower saying all those buildings smashed by December's tornadoes were corporate death sites because their shoddy construction broke no laws. Let's ask corporate America if it's still too soon for Congress to mandate tornado-safe rooms. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.